The old lantern. Elias never cared for the attic. It loomed above his family's out-of-date Victorian house like a sullen sentry, its thin staircase squeaking beneath his feet as if urging him to go back down. The air upstairs was full of dust and the pungent, sour smell of mold, and the solitary bulb hanging from the rafters cast as many shadows as light. But the roof had developed a leak after last week's storm, and his mother, frail and wheelchair-bound at home, had required him to go in and investigate. So on a dreary November afternoon, Elias trudged upstairs with flashlight in hand and a knot of dread in his stomach. The attic was a labyrinth of discarded things, bent trunks, broken mirrors, a dressmaker's dummy slumped forward as if it were drunk. He cast his flashlight beam across the disarray, looking for water stains or broken timbers. That was where he spotted it, a glint of tarnished brass between stacks of rotting books. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pushed aside the books, exposing an old lantern. It was heavy, its panes of glass clouded with years of usage, its metal frame etched with twisting patterns that seemed to twist in the dim light. A wick inside it was unburned, and small brass key poked out from its base. Elias hefted the lantern in his hand, startled by how much it weighed. It was alive, almost as if it vibrated softly between his palms. He turned the key half expecting it to snap in his hand but clicked it smoothly on, and the wick leapt alight with a golden glow. The attic changed. The shadows drew back, and the air was warmer and sweeter scented, like an evening in midsummer. But the light did not just light, it uncovered. The walls of the attic shone and visions danced upon them like a silent movie. Elias observed a woman in a high-necked dress, her face thin and pale, pacing across the floor of the attic. She had in her hand a letter, her fingers trembling as she ripped it to shreds and shoved them into the trunk. The vision changed. The same woman, now older, crying as she knelt before the dressmaker's form, softly saying something Elias was not able to make out. His heart was thudding. This was not some fantasy, some play of light. This was the lantern revealing the past, the things which had occurred in this house itself. He turned the key once again, and the flame died down, the visions disappearing. The attic was once again just an empty attic, cold and dusty. Something was not right. The air was thicker, as if he was being stared at. He turned his head and flashlight beamed quickly across the room but did not see anything. Nevertheless, the feeling would not go away, like fingers at the back of his neck. He seized the lantern and rushed downstairs and locked the attic door. Elias didn't sleep that evening. The lantern, on his bedside table next to his bed lamp, caught the moon's light and twinkled. He reassured himself it was only an old relic, something unusual and curious. The pictures he'd seen in his mind did not agree. Who was the woman? What did the letter say? And why did the attic seem so inhabited once he'd used the lantern? He caught some fitful sleep before suddenly being awoken by the sound of something, a soft, repetitive tapping overhead. Tap, 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 pacing footsteps on the attic floor. He took his flashlight and padded silently to the door of the attic, his heart pounding in his chest. The tapping ceased as he reached for the door handle, but in its place was the sound of low, sad sighing, such as wind through an open window. He swung the door wide open with his flashlight pointed upward. Nothing. Shadows. Silence. He caught himself almost laughing at himself for his nerves until he caught sight of it, a smudge on the dirty floor like the mark of a footprint, though he had swept the attic out just hours before. In his room, Elias gazed at the lantern. It was incredible, certainly, but also unsettling. He should sell it, better still destroy it. But the fascination that had attracted him in the first place ate at him. What else might it reveal to him? What secrets did the house contain? He turned the key again, just slightly, and the light from the flame danced back to life. The room was filled with light again, and another scene manifested on his bedroom wall. The woman again, now having some sort of argument with a dark-suited man. The faces were contorted with anger, and the man's hand went back as if to hit her. Elias gasped, and the flame died on him again, the image disappearing. But now the presence was instant. A shudder ran through the room, and the flame of the lantern was blue, sending macabre shadows dancing. A voice whispered in his ear, close enough to be inside his head. "You should not have looked." Elias stepped back, his breath catching. The air thickened and became heavy again, and in the corner of his eye he caught sight of something, a woman's shadow, her head bent, her fists closed. She did not shift position, but her presence was one of mass and foreboding. Elias extinguished the lantern's flame, and the room was dark. The shadow disappeared, but the cold remained, and the whisper stayed in his mind. He secretly stashed the lantern under his bed and swore never to touch it again. But lying in the darkness, his eyes wide open, he realized the attic, and what he had disturbed, wasn't finished with him. The house was stirring now, its secrets awakening, and Elias knew he had opened something he may never be able to close. Elias stayed out of the attic for 3 days. He ran himself ragged with housework, care for his mother's well-being, and ignoring the lantern, which he'd wrapped in an old blanket and stashed in a closet. The house was not the same anymore. Doors opened by themselves, and cold air crept through rooms when the windows were closed. At night time, the tapping returned, sometimes in conjunction with whispers too soft to make out. His mother was in ignorance of the lantern's magic, describing out nightmares about a weeping woman in the attic. Elias dissembled, telling her it was wind, but he felt guilt creeping in. He had awakened something, and it wasn't being silenced. On the 4th day, fascination, or possibly compulsion, called him back into the closet. He removed the wrapping from the lantern, its brass cold against his skin, and held it in his room. He locked his door, drew his curtains, and turned the key. The flames sprouted to life and the walls danced with new visions. The woman from earlier appeared once more, younger looking now, laughing with other people in what appeared to be the house's parlor. The scene was alive and full of warmth but grew dark as the woman disappeared into the attic, where she encountered the man in the black suit. The two of them had hushed conversations with each other, their faces taut, and the man handed her a small locked box. Elias crept closer, enthralled. The woman concealed the box in the space behind one of the loose boards in the attic, a place he knew from his examination. The vision changed again to years hence, and the woman appeared gaunt and paranoid, obsessively checking the floorboard. Then suddenly the scene changed again. The woman was in the attic, her neck in a noose, her eyes empty. Elias screamed out aloud, and the light of the lantern flared as the vision faded. The room became cold. Whispers sprouted again, more audible now, one on top of another like a chorus of moans. "You saw too much," one snippet accused. Elias turned but was alone. But the air vibrated with presence, as if the room was filled with unseen people. A shadow crossed the wall, not his own shadow but that of a woman with her head at an impossible angle. He had trouble with the lantern, turning the key in an attempt to put it out, but it stuck. The shadow became keener and reached from the darkness. A pale, gaunt hand touched his arm. Elias shouted, letting go of the lantern. The fire died and the shadow disappeared, but the room was still electric with spite. He seized his flashlight and rushed to the attic in an urgent need to know. He uncovered the loose floorboard from the vision and pried it open, and a small, rusty case was inside. He opened it with trembling hands and found a locket and a creased letter. The locket held the woman's picture inside it, her eyes blazing in the small face. The letter was dry, Its ink faded, but he was able to decipher bits of it. Dot betrayed me. Cannot forgive. The truth must be buried. As he read, the attic became cold. The bulb was erratic and flickered. A voice whispered harshly, "Put it back." Elias lost his grip on the letter, his flashlight beam illuminating a shape in the corner of the room, a woman, her face gaunt and her eyes black voids. She did not part from where she stood, but was a pressure compressing the air out of his lungs. He stepped back, the box slipping out of his grasp. The figure disappeared, but the door slammed shut behind him, imprisoning him in the attic. A sense of panic grew. Elias beat on the door calling for his mother, but she never appeared. The whispers intensified, surrounding him, accusing him of having stolen their secrets. He collapsed to the ground with the locket in his hand and realized in terror that the lantern wasn't just revealing the past, it was calling out the dead. And it was angry. Elias didn't sleep. The letter and locket hid in his dresser drawer, but their presence tainted the room. The house felt less of a home and more of a cage, one where unseen eyes pulsed on the very walls. His mother saw his pale face and inquired as to what was wrong. He was unable to tell her. How did he tell her he'd opened doors to ghosts? He gave her a weak smile and vowed to repair the leak in the future. And the attic door he'd pried open after being trapped now would not close. It flung open at odd times, showing the dark stairs like an invitation. He attempted to learn about the history of the house by poring through records at the library, but uncovered little. The Victorian had been constructed in 1890 for the prosperous Harrow family, but the records ceased in 1910. A librarian had spoken of whispers of a scandal, a disappearance of some sort, but nothing was left. Elias was certain the secrets resided in the lantern. In spite of better judgment, he fetched it from his closet and relit it in hopes of gaining more knowledge and placating what he'd disturbed. The flame lit its golden hue, and the wall pulsed with a new image. The dark-suited man was in the attic, his face harsh and unyielding. He was yelling at the woman, whose name, Elias read from their fight, was Margaret Harrow. The man, her brother Thomas, denounced her for tarring their family name. He pointed at the locked case in his hand and promised to burn its contents. The woman pleaded for him to halt, but he hit her and she stumbled backward, clutching at the locket on her neck. The image changed to a tempestuous evening. Thomas was in the attic, incinerating the contents of the box in an iron basin. Margaret was in the darkness, her face masked in desperation. When the fire went out, she attacked him, and the two of them wrestled. The picture faded out as Elias panted. The lantern's flame blazed blue, and the room was filled with a low, rasping moan. Shadows writhed on the wall in not one form but two, Margaret's gaunt form and a taller, bulkier one with jagged edges of torn cloth. "You've seen enough," the low, resonant voice of a man snarled. Elias's blood ran cold as the shadow above him shifted, becoming more defined in the darkness until it was the shape of Thomas. His face was a grim mask of bone, his eyes blazing with anger. The air thickened, and Elias felt his windpipe being crushed by unseen fingers. He flailed at the lantern, extinguishing the light, and the darkness was gone, but the squeezing feeling was still there, a bruise on his heart. Desperate as he was to know what had been burned, what was worth committing violence, Elias went back to the attic, locket in hand. He needed to know what had been destroyed. He relit the lantern, and the vision began again, Margaret, standing alone now, knotting the rope in the attic. But before descending from the chair herself, Margaret had whispered an execration, her voice echoing in his mind. "No one will know peace until the truth is told." The flame danced and Margaret's ghost was before him, bruised neck, accusatory eyes. "Tell it." She spat, and the attic trembled, the timbers groaning as if the house itself hurt. Elias ran, the lantern held against his chest. He barricaded himself in his room, but the ghosts tracked him. Whispers in the darkness called him thief and meddler. He knew the locket was the secret. It bound Margaret to the mansion, to her curse. But to destroy it could provoke her further. At sunrise, Elias made his decision. He would discover the whole truth at all costs. But the ghosts would not want it known. Elias was unraveling. The ghosts tormented him day and night, their whispers creeping into his sleep. Margaret's voice was pitiful, pleading for him to share her story, while Thomas's was a snarl promising destruction if he did. The locket in his pocket felt warm as if it were alive, and the lantern appeared to be softly glowing even in its dark state. His mother, aware of his misery, begged him to get out of the house, but Elias refused. He was too deep in the mystery, too caught up in the ghosts. The truth, he thought, would liberate them all. He went back upstairs to the attic with the lantern and the crowbar. The visions had given him snippets, but he needed the entire story. He struck the lantern alight, and the walls of the room sprang to life with the past. This time, the image was from earlier, children's playtime for Margaret and Thomas in the attic. In walked their father, stern-faced in his waistcoat. He held the locked box and slipped it under the baseboard. He confided in whispers to Thomas about keeping the family safe. Unseen by either of them was the curious face of Margaret. The vision skipped forward. Young adult Margaret opened the trunk in secret and read its contents, letters detailing a scandal. Their father had cheated his business partner into bankruptcy and suicide. Confronting Thomas, who was also in on it, he grew angry and locked her in the attic for days. The last vision was of her being dead, but not at her own hand. Thomas, enraged, pushed her out of the chair and made it appear as though she had committed suicide in order to shut her up. Elias stumbled backward, the lantern's flame blazing. The attic was filled with a deafening shriek, and Margaret's ghost materialized, her form real, her face twisted in anguish. "Tell them," she shrieked, and the house shook and dust poured from the ceiling. But Thomas's ghost appeared as well, his presence looming like a shadow, his voice like thunder. "You'll die before you talk." The ghosts fought, their bodies blurring as the attic seemed to fold in on itself. Elias fled, lantern blazing his hands, and barely made it out before the door crashed shut. He spent the evening reading the letter from the box, piecing together the scandal. The locket he had discovered had a strand of Margaret's hair in it, a lifeline for her spirit. He must bring the truth out, but how? The library had nothing in the records, and the town had forgotten the Harrows. He thought as he paced back and forth in his mind. The house became agitated. Things crashed from shelves, and his mother shrieked, saying she'd seen a man in her bedroom. Elias found her shivering. Her finger pointed at something not there. He resolved to stand vigil in the attic and face the ghost himself. He lit the lantern and summoned Margaret's name, vowing to relay her story. The flame blazed pure white, illuminating visions of the past and present and something foreboding, a future in which Elias was dead, the locket clutched in his hand. A ghost of Margaret appeared weeping, but Thomas's shadow was deeper in the room, his fingers clawing at Elias's throat. The lantern dropped, its glass shattering, and the flame burst forth in powerful light. As the light died out, Elias was left all alone, the lantern cold to his touch. But the ghosts had not departed, indeed, they had intensified. The house creaked, and the locket scorched his skin. Elias realized he had only one option left to break the curse, and the ghosts were converging on him, the truth potentially costing him his life. Elias had run out of time. The house was in shambles, the air thick with vengeful ghosts. Margaret's whispers called to him to do something, and Thomas's threats vibrated in the walls. The locket was hot in his pocket, and the lantern, cracked, seemed to throb with otherworldly energy. His mother had fled in fear to take shelter with a neighbor, and Elias was left to deal with the ghosts. He knew what had happened: the Harrow scandal, the murder of Margaret, the cover-up by Thomas, but knowing was not enough. He needed to expose it to the world, to shatter the curse and release Margaret's spirit. He added proof: the letter, the locket, and his vision notes. He was going to present them to the town historian, a woman who had expressed interest in local secrets. But the spirits had other ideas. As he was packing, the lantern blazed to life on its own, projecting visions of Thomas torching the evidence of the scandal on his face, his features contorted in triumph. The vision changed to Margaret, her noose growing tighter, her curse ensnaring her in the house. And another image, Elias in flames, the locket disintegrating in his hand. The door to the attic swung open and a gust of wind rushed through the house with Thomas's voice screaming out, "You'll burn with her." Elias seized the lantern and sped to the attic where the ghosts were strongest. He flashed the flame on, calling out for Margaret's name, appealing for her help. The walls flared with light and Margaret materialized before him, her presence shining but delicate. "Tell the truth," she whispered softly, "and I'll shield you." Thomas's ghost burst into existence, his presence a density of shadow and rage. He lunged at Elias with outstretched hands like claws. But then Margaret stepped in between them, her light meeting his darkness. The attic shuddered and groaned as the lantern's flame roared out of control. Thomas Harrow murdered Margaret to keep their father's secrets. Elias yelled into the uproar. She was innocent. The locket blazed and Margaret's presence grew stronger. She added her voice to his, proclaiming the scandal for all to know. The house trembled and shook, and Thomas's ghost shrieked, his presence disintegrating. The lantern broke, and the flame died out. Margaret's ghost disappeared as well, her eyes full of thankfulness. The attic went back to silence, the air refreshed for the first time in days. Elias slumped on the ground, holding the locket, which was cold to the touch. The ghosts had disappeared, but the house was empty, as if it had lost its heart. The following day, Elias gave the historian the proof he needed to publish the Harrow story. The town was ablaze with the news, and the house was subdued, its heavy shadow removed. Elias never forgot the lantern's glow or the ghost's anger. He retained the locket as a reminder of the price of secrets and promised never to wake the dead again. But occasionally at midnight he could have sworn he heard a soft knock, as if the attic still harbored one final truth for him to discover. It had been 6 months since Elias Warren lifted the Harrow family curse, or at least he had believed as much. The Victorian house was silent now, its heavy atmosphere gone, and the town had accepted the historian's write-up on Maggie Harrow's untimely demise. Elias had relocated his mother to a small apartment, and left the house empty, its attic locked behind a new latch. The locket was in a safe deposit vault, the broken lantern in a container of trash never again to be disturbed. And yet Elias felt as though the past hadn't finished with him. In his sleep at night, he had visions of dancing flame and heard soft tapping, as of footsteps pacing some invisible floor. It started with a letter. Town historian Miss Evelyn Crane called Elias in an urgent tone. She'd found new records in the Harrow estate files, which indicated another scandal unknown to Margaret. The letter made reference to a beacon of truth, the very word sending shivers down Elias's spine, recalling the lantern's otherworldly glow. He went to see Evelyn in the library against his better judgment, where he was presented with a ledger from 1908. This recorded what appeared to be payments from the head of the Harrow family to another unknown entity, marked only for silence. A cryptic note in the margin stated, "The beacon must never burn again." Elias's stomach roiled. He hadn't shared what he'd found with Evelyn, but her voice provoked an unshakable unease. That evening, he went back to the house, urged on by some compulsion he couldn't identify. The air inside was musty and thick with the smell of dust and a sharper note of something smoky, like burnt wood. He made his way upstairs to the attic, his flashlight shivering in his hand, and opened the trunk where he'd stored the remnants of the lantern. To his horror, the lantern was whole again, its glass unblemished, its brass shining as though polished. The wick was softly aglow, not lit, and the attic vibrated with a low, resonant hum. He should have fled. Elias turned the key of the lantern, only slightly, unable to deny its magnetism. The flame roared to life, softer this time, and the walls of the attic seemed to glow with a new image. A male figure, not the Harrow patriarch and not Thomas, was in a darkened room, his face hidden under a hooded cloak. He knelt in front of an ugly altar, candles and bones surrounding it. These same figures appeared in the attic as he hid a small iron-bound book in the floorboards and quietly said something that sent shivers through Elias's skin. The light reveals, but the shadow binds. The flame danced and died out, and the vision disappeared, but the attic chilled and grew thick with malevolent feeling. A voice, not Margaret's and not Thomas's, grated through the darkness. You awakened it. Elias turned, his flash of light illuminating something, a form, a robed figure, its face in empty space, its hands holding the iron book. The figure did not move but was like a pressure on Elias's chest. He flipped the lantern out, and the figure disappeared, but the door to the attic groaned open, and an ash line ran down the stairs. Elias tracked the trail of ash, his heart thumping in his chest, to the parlor. In the center of the room, on the floor in the midst of its circle of ash, was one page torn from the iron book. The text was written in jagged script. The beacon's light calls the keeper, and the keeper guards the sin. Elias trembled as he read. The lantern was not just a window into the past. It was a summons, bound to something older, something darker, than the Harrow blood. He tried to burn the page in order to break the connection, but the ash regrouped itself, the words appearing as if written again. The house was alive at night. Windows shook, and the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Elias barricaded himself in his former bedroom, the lantern in his grip, but the walls seemed to throb with other people's shadows. The hooded face materialized once more, closer now, its void face just an inch from his. Give it back. It whispered, its voice being hundreds of whispers. Elias shrieked and flung the lantern across the room where it landed on its base, its flame refueling itself. The figure reached out as Elias lost consciousness, awakening hours later to the lantern lying on his bedside table with its key halfway turned. He realized then that the lantern had not lost potency with Margaret's curse. It was bound to the keeper of secrets worse than the Harrow scandal. And Elias, having used the lantern once more, had summoned it. The house was not just haunted anymore, it was a trap, and the keeper was getting closer. Elias was imprisoned in his own existence. The presence of the keeper accompanied him at all times, its empty face reflected in mirrors, its voice echoing in his mind. The lantern, impossible to be destroyed now, stayed on his kitchen table, its flame dancing even in darkness. He had attempted to leave town, but the vehicle had broken down at the city limits, and the shadow of the keeper had haunted the rearview. Evelyn Crane, in ignorance of the lantern's true nature, phoned him constantly for more details, her voice becoming urgent. Elias had ignored her because the truth would only bring her into the nightmare. Desperate for answers, he pored through occult books Evelyn had suggested. He discovered mentions of a beacon of binding, in ancient rituals to seal secrets in blood. The lantern was not just an antique, it was a container for the keeper, an otherworldly enforcer tasked with safeguarding the transgressions of its masters. The Harrow case was only the tip of the iceberg. The robed figure's ritual suggested something more nefarious at play. Elias had to discover the iron book with the hope it possessed some means of exiling the keeper. He went back to the attic, the lantern in hand, its heft heavier than before. The air was heavy, the darkness alive with movement. He struck the flame and the walls shimmered again with the robed figure, now in the basement of the house, carving symbols from the walls. The vision presented him with the iron book, its pages crowded with names and dates, each of them something the keeper had hidden. The last page had his name on it, in fresh ink. His breath was caught as the vision faded and the keeper appeared before him, its robed form looming, its void face throb of hunger. "You cannot hide," it told him, its voice like a knife. The floorboards groaned, and the attic thudded as the iron book opened itself, pulsating with a sickly glow. Elias's fingers closed on it, but the pages scalded his skin, and the keeper's hands clamped down on his wrists like ice. He yelled out as he dropped the book, and the lantern's flame blazed forth in a new vision, the robed form of the other time, crafting the lantern in a ritual of blood and bone, binding the keeper to its light. The keeper was not just a guard, it was something of a parasite, living off the guilt of seekers who happened upon the truth. Elias lashed out, calling out the names from the book in the hope of diminishing the keeper through exposure of its secrets. The lantern's light and the darkness of the keeper clashed in the attic, which groaned and responded with cracking walls as if under the crush of history. Elias's voice was hoarse, but he read on, each name shrinking the keeper's presence. He finally read his own name aloud and ripped the page loose, incinerating it in the lantern flame. The keeper screamed out as its void face shattered and the lantern exploded, its light dying. The attic grew silent. The iron book disintegrated into dust, and the keeper disappeared. Elias stumbled from the house and thudded onto the lawn as the day broke. The house remained immobile, but he was certain it was not safe. He torched it on the evening of the same day, observing as the fire engulfed the attic, the cellar, all remnants of the lantern's power. The locket, remaining in the safe deposit box, felt chilly now, its link broken. Elias left far behind, but the whispers of the keeper haunted his sleep, indistinct but insistent. He never mentioned the lantern at all, not to Evelyn at least, who printed out a cryptic history of the Harrow's secrets omitting the occult. But in moments of stillness, Elias experienced an occasional spark of heat in his pocket as if the locket, or something more, continued to monitor him, awaiting his return to uncover the truth. The hollow halls. The wind shrieked through the bare trees, clawing at the van as it rattled down the neglected road. Dr. Evelyn Hart held the steering wheel tightly in her hands, her knuckles white against the cracked leather. In the distance loomed the abandoned Merwood Hospital, its jagged outline against the bruised sky. Its dark and empty windows stared out like the eyes of some forgotten deity. Evelyn's team of 4 Institute of Paranormal Studies researchers rode in silence in the back, their equipment softly clinking against one another. "This place makes me shudder already," grumbled Lucas, the team's technical expert, tugging at his glasses. His voice shook, betraying the bluster he displayed back at the Institute. Next to him, Dr. Priya Sharma, who was the historian, thumbed through a folder of yellowed papers, her mouth drawn into a tight line. Marcus, the imposing security expert, gazed out of the window, his hand on the flashlight at his waist. In the rear seat, Sophie, who was the medium, held a silver locket, her mind elsewhere. Evelyn forced a smile. "We're here to record, not alarm. Rumors of Merwood, tests, vanishings, they're unsubstantiated until we document them." But the words sounded false. Hospital history was a tapestry of whispers, victims subjected to inhumane experiments, physicians searching for forbidden secrets, and in 1953, a fire that reduced the building to ash. Nobody was certain why the hospital was suddenly vacated during the night, or what had happened to its residents. The van skidded to stop in front of the hospital's rusty gates. Marcus leapt out of it, his boots crunching on the gravel, and fought with the padlock. It yielded with a creaking sound as if the hospital itself was letting out its breath. The gates creaked open, exposing a courtyard cluttered with weeds and scattered with broken glass. The main building towered in front of them, its brick face cracked and sullied, ivy crawling like lines of veins across it. "Seems nobody's been here in years," Priya said, stepping out with her notebook. She indicated with her finger at the faded sign at the entrance, Merwood Sanatorium EST 1921. This was once a tuberculosis ward before it became whatever it was. Shivering, Sophie wrapped her coat closer. "It's not empty," she whispered. "I can sense them. Watching." Her words seemed to freeze in midair. Evelyn brushed aside the shiver crawling along her spine. "Establish base in the lobby. Lucas, roll camera. Marcus, sweep the perimeter. Priya, begin documenting. Sophie, stay with me." The team assented, though their expressions betrayed apprehension. They each took out their equipment, cameras, EMF meters, sound recorders, and stepped across the threshold. The lobby was a decaying cavern. Dust danced in the beam of Evelyn's flashlight on the peeling wallpaper and overturned furniture. High above, the grand staircase spiraled upward into darkness where it had been left until the banister had splintered. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and something pungent like blood. Lucas set down his tripod as he steadied his hands to adjust the lens. "This is like some nightmare," he said, trying to laugh. Priya knelt next to a stack of rumpled patient files with curled-up edges. "These are from the 1940s, she said, waving one of them in the air. "Names and treatments. Lobotomies, electroshock therapy. Something called Serum X, nothing about what it was." She hesitated as she read a doctor's note scribbled in the margin. "They scream at night. They won't stop." Marcus came back, his expression grim. "The perimeter is clear, but the back door is boarded from the inside. Whoever did it didn't want people in or out." He looked at Sophie, who was standing stock-still by the stairs, her locket held tightly in her hand. "They're here," Sophie whispered. "The doctors. The patients. They're trapped." She looked into the darkness, as if seeing something the others did not. Evelyn's flashlight flashed unevenly across the walls. "Sophie, concentrate. We require evidence and not emotions." And yet as she said it, a low moan resounded from the stairs, barely audible. The team was immobilized. Lucas's camera beeped as its battery lost power in spite of being fully charged. "Did you hear that?" Priya whispered, clutching her notebook like a shield. "It's just the wind," Evelyn replied, but her voice trembled. She shined her flashlight along the stairs into a hallway engulfed in darkness. The moan was again heard, but sharper this time, and was then accompanied by a muffled shuffle of footsteps along the floor. Marcus drew his flashlight as if it were a gun. "That's not wind." He stepped forward towards the stairs, but then Sophie caught his arm. "Please don't," she begged. "They're angry. They don't want us here." Her heart was thudding, but she steeled herself. "We're scientists. We do research. Marcus, Lucas, come on. Priya, Sophie, remain on guard and watch the equipment." She silenced Sophie's protests and led off up the stairs, her boots thudding on the buckled wood. The hallway at the other end was a tunnel of decay that was lined with doors marked in numbers. A few hung partially open, offering glimpses of groan-inducing rusted beds and destroyed equipment. The air became colder, denser, as if the building itself was exhaling. Evelyn's flashlight had caught sight of movement at the end of the hallway, a shadow that disappeared. "Did you see that?" Lucas whispered quietly. his hands trembling with his camera. "Keep filming," Evelyn commanded, her voice constrained. The moan sounded again, closer this time, accompanied by a softly whispered word, as if the sound of multiple voices in timbres of distress. She moved another step forward and felt herself get cold. Her breath misted the air. Then from behind one of the doors was heard one clear word. "Help!" The single word hung in the air, cutting and urgent. "Help!" Evelyn halted, her flashlight quivering in her hand. The hall lay out before her, the walls marred by flaking paint and dark smudges of something, rust, possibly worse. Lucas's camera clicked, freezing the silence that hung in its wake, as Marcus stood stock still, his flashlight probing the line of doors. "Where did it come from?" Lucas whispered, his voice almost inaudible above the roar of the camera. His glasses misted slightly from his rapid breathing. She pointed to one of the doors on the left, its number, Ward 3, barely readable through grime. The appeal had been from there, she was positive. She moved forward slowly, her boots scraping against the broken linoleum. The air was heavy with something that pressed against her skin as if alive. "Stay close," she said, her own bravery uncertain. Marcus ground his jaw and opened the door. Creaking on rusty hinges, it opened into a long, thin ward filled with iron beds. The mattresses had been removed, and only bare frames hung wrapped in cobwebs. A single window at the distant end was boarded across, strips of moonlight filtering through the gaps. She entered, her flashlight breaking through the darkness. The light caught sparks of shattered glass on the floor, fragments of vials or syringes. This was probably a treatment room, her voice resonating softly. A rusted tray table was overturned in the corner, its equipment, forceps, scalpels, scattered on the ground like bones. Lucas swept his camera across the space, his breathing catching. "Look at the walls," he said, gesturing. Scrawled on the plaster were wild scratches, lines, circles, and what appeared to be words as well, too faded to decipher. One word leapt out at him, scratched deeper into the wall than the others. "We see you." Marcus grumbled to himself, his grip on his flashlight tightening. "Something's not right here. We should turn back." "Not yet," Evelyn replied, her stomach twisting. She walked further into the ward, attracted to a bed frame in the middle. Its straps, leather cracked with age, hung loose on it, tainted with dark stains. She extended her hand, her fingers pausing on the straps, before the door at her back slammed shut. Lucas yelped in surprise, almost dropping his camera. Marcus turned, pushing against the door, but it was not moving. "It's stuck," he snarled, using all his strength. The wood creaked but refused to give. Evelyn's heart was pounding. "Calm down. The building's ancient. The frame must have warped." But the words sounded false. The air was getting chilly and the darkness seemed to thicken. The flashlight again flickered and for an instant she caught sight of something in the corner, a lean, shadowy shape before it was gone. "Did you see that?" Lucas stuttered, his camera flailing back and forth. "Focus!" snapped Evelyn, but her own fear clawed at her. She thumped on the door, calling for Priya and Sophie. There was no response from the other side of the door, only silence, thick and oppressive. Then from the end of the ward sounded softly and rhythmically the tapping of fingernails upon metal. Marcus shone his flashlight towards the sound and found nothing but vacant beds. The tapping sounded closer and stronger, accompanied by a soft hum, as if lullaby sung in a cracked voice. Evelyn's flesh crept. "Who's there?" she called out in her breaking voice. The hum ceased. Silence closed in, thick enough it vibrated in her ears. Then slowly, one of the beds started to shudder, metal legs scraping against the floorboards. The straps rose, curling upward as if some invisible hands were tugging on them. Lucas stepped back, camera trembling. "This isn't happening," he whispered. Evelyn tugged at his sleeve, steering him towards the door. "Marcus, open it!" she cried. Marcus smashed his shoulder against the wood, and it yielded with a splintering crash. They stumbled out into the corridor, panting, as the tapping started again behind them, a wild drumbeat. They rushed along, their footsteps echoing through the darkness. The hallway was longer than it had been before, doors blurring by. Evelyn shone her flashlight on brief moments of movement, shadows darting behind the glass doors, hands against the doors. She did not pause. They hit the stairs and went down, almost falling in their rush. In the lobby, Priya and Sophie huddled over the equipment, their faces ashen. "Where were you?" Priya snapped at her, her voice laced with fear. "We heard thuds, but the radios weren't functioning." She looked up, her eyes wide with fright. "They're awake now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You disturbed them." Evelyn steadied herself against the wall, panting. "Something's in that ward. Let's watch the tape," said Lucas, rewinding the camera. The picture on the monitor flickered, showing the ward inside, the beds, the battered walls. The corner of the frame was empty until suddenly it wasn't. A figure was standing in it, thin, gaunt, its eyes empty and unblinking. It wasn't in the room when they had been in it. The lobby seemed cramped now, the darkness pushing in on them as they gathered around Lucas's camera. The image on the screen watched them back, its empty eyes appearing to track them even in the fuzzy video. Evelyn's mouth was dry. It wasn't there," she whispered. Lucas halted the video with his shaking hands. "I didn't see it on camera. It's like it appeared later." He zoomed in closer, and the face of the apparition became gaunt, its mouth slightly parted as if it was whispering something. The image stuttered, and for an instant the apparition appeared nearer to the lens. Priya held on to her notebook tightly, her knuckles turning white. "This is proof. Actual proof. But it's also a warning." She looked at Sophie, who was seated cross-legged on the ground, swaying back and forth. "What do you feel?" Her eyes were elsewhere, her locket turning in her hand. "Pain. Anger. These are bound to it, to what has been done here. The patients. They didn't just die. They were altered." She broke. "The doctors. They're continuing where they left off." Marcus paced back and forth, his flashlight sending nervous flashes across the wall. "We have to get out. This isn't worth dying for." Evelyn shook her head, though fear was eating at her. "We're here to find out the truth. If we now leave, we'll have nothing except ghost stories." "You said records. Where were the records stored?" Priya hesitated before opening her notebook. "The basement. The records room was where the administration files of the hospital were stored. If we seek information on Serum X or the experiments, it's where we'll get them." "The basement?" groaned Lucas. "You've got to be kidding." Evelyn paid him no mind, picking up the flashlight. "Marcus, Priya, come with me. Lucas, just keep the cameras rolling and watch out. Call us if anything goes wrong." Sophie's face was ashen but nodded weakly. The basement stairs were hidden behind a rusty door in the lobby. The door groaned as Marcus pushed it open to reveal a spiral of concrete steps plunging into darkness. A musty smell of mold mingled with something sour and sweet filled the growing darkness. Evelyn went in first, her flashlight hardly penetrating the darkness. The walls were slippery with moisture and smeared with black mold that appeared to throb in the beam from her light. In the back, a thin corridor extended into darkness, lined with tipped-over metal filing cabinets like fallen warriors. The records room itself was at the end, its door partially open, papers spilling out across the doorway. Evelyn entered it, her boots crunching on dry documents. The room was labyrinthine in terms of shelves of all descriptions, some of them having collapsed, others groaning under loads of fuzzy files. Priya knelt down and rummaged through the papers. "These are patient records," she said, her voice echoing. "Admissions, treatment, deaths. Look at this. Dozens of files were transferred on the same day in 1953. No destination indicated." She held up one of the files, its pages discolored but readable. "And here's a memo on Serum X. It indicates it was intended to boost neural capacity, but the side effects: agitation, hallucinations, violence." Marcus shined his flashlight across the shelves, his expression grim. "Sounds like they were playing God in here." His light caught something in the corner, a medical table, its straps in place, surrounded by broken vials. The table was dark-stained, the floor under it cracked as if something had hit it. Evelyn's flashlight flickered and the room grew dark. A low buzz hung in the air, as though from failing wiring, but it had rhythm to it, something akin to a heart beating. "Do you hear it?" she whispered urgently. Priya nodded wide-eyed. "It's coming from the walls." She laid her hand on the closest shelf and jerked it back. "It's warm. That can't be." Marcus stepped forward towards the table and hesitated. "Look at the ground." Etched across the ground were more words, rough and crooked, "Not dead. Never dead." The buzz grew stronger as it was joined by an indistinct whispering, like words being spoken just out of hearing. Evelyn's heart was thudding. "Take what you can and go." She stuffed files into Priya's bag, but the air thickened, the darkness twisting in impossible directions. Her flashlight sputtered out altogether, and the room was nearly black. Marcus's beam caught the edge of movement, a form standing at the table, its head at an impossible angle. When he swept the light back, it was gone. "Move!" Marcus yelled out, tugging on Evelyn's arm. The two of them lurched out of the room, Priya holding the files tightly. The hallway extended before them, the stairs longer than before. The hum caught up with them now as whispers of words mingled. "Stay. See. No." They rushed into the reception area, panting. Lucas and Sophie were present, but the cameras were dead, their monitors dark. "Power surge," Lucas reported, his face pale. "And Sophie saw something." She indicated the staircase with her finger, her voice shaking. "They're coming down." The words of Sophie seemed to hover in the air as a curse. "They're coming down." The team's heads turned as one, flashlights focused on the grand staircase. The blackness at the pinnacle of the steps appeared to throb, a living shadow swallowing the light. A soft shuffle reverberated from above, slow and heavy, as if bare feet were being dragged across the floor. Evelyn's pulse raced in her head. "What did you see, Sophie?" she snapped, her voice more harsh than she had aimed for. She held tightly to her locket as her eyes stayed trained on the stairs. "Figures. Thin, pale. In gowns or coats. They're not just patients. Doctors are with them." Her voice trembled. "They're all wrong." Lucas frantically fiddled with his camera in an effort to restart it. "The batteries have died. All of them." He looked at the stack of equipment before him, his face ashen. "This can't be happening." Priya held the purloined files in her hands tightly, her voice quivering. "The reports had said second floor had an operating theater. That's where the experiments were conducted. If we want our answers, we must go there." "Are you crazy?" Marcus exclaimed, his flashlight vibrating in his hand. "We only just escaped from the basement." Evelyn hesitated between fear and necessity. The shuffle became louder as it was joined by what sounded like a distant moan coming from all sides. "We can't remain here," she said. The theater can have equipment, logs, something to account for all of this. We go together. Nobody gets left behind. The team shared nervous looks but nodded in unison. They reached for what remained of the functioning equipment, flashlights, Priya's notebook, Sophie's locket, and began to climb the stairs. The wood groaned beneath them, the sound of each step resonating like an actual heartbeat. The air was chilly, the darkness deeper, as they climbed to the second floor. The corridor extended in front of them, lined with doors labeled in fading signs, Ward 4, Storage, Surgery. The operating theater at the end was partially opened by its double doors. A dim light shone inside it, not the steady one of electricity but something wavering, as of a candle. Evelyn moved forward before them, her flashlight barely penetrating the darkness. The theater was an iron cavern of rust and broken glass. A domed operating table filled the center of the room, flanked by levels of viewing seats, their cushions decayed. A huge surgical light hung at an angle from the ceiling, its bulbs lifeless. The dim light was from the table itself, where the tiniest glow pulsed back and forth, like an iron heartbeat. Priya gasped, her hand extended towards the walls. The walls were plastered with diagrams, hand-sketched illustrations of the human form, but disfigured, with additional limbs and hollowed bodies. Scrawled in hasty script surrounding the illustrations were the scribbled messages: Serum X successful. Subjects responsive. Control lost. "This is where they tested it," she whispered. Marcus swept his flashlight across the seats, his expression grim. "Look up there." In the darkness of the observation tier, outlines appeared to move, figures seated, heads bent. When the beam of light caught them, they were nowhere to be found, only vacant seats. Sophie whimpered and edged towards the door. "They're here. Watching." Her locket dropped from her fingers and clattered on the floor. When she bent to pick it up, the light of the operating table grew brighter, throwing eerie, jagged shadows on the room. A low hum in the room was not mechanical but vocalized, more like the sound of many voices chanting together. Evelyn's flashlight went out, reducing them to near darkness. That left only the table's glow as their beacon, lighting the presence of something standing by it. Tall and shrouded in a frayed surgical coat, its face hidden behind a broken mask was what it looked like. Gloved and stained hands held the syringe. It was filled with brilliant liquid. Its face tilted upward as if it was observing them. "Who are you?" Evelyn cried out in demand, her voice trembling. The figure did not respond. The syringe was raised instead, and the hum intensified as the voices became audible. "Join us. See us. Become us." Marcus caught Evelyn's elbow and pulled her back. "We have to go!" But the doors slammed closed behind them with a sound like a shot. The face moved forward, its mask catching the dim light. Beyond it other figures moved, patients in shabby gowns with hollow eyes and jerking limbs. Lucas shrieked and dropped his useless camera. Priya held on to her files and mumbled something incoherent to herself, a prayer, it seemed. Sophie dropped to her knees and wept as the figures approached her. Evelyn's mind scrambled for an exit, but the air was heavy with their presence, their voices crawling into her mind. Then the overhead surgical light flickered on above them, blinding them. The figures disappeared, the hum ceasing instantly. The team was immobile, panting, as the doors slowly opened behind them. The operating table lay in darkness once more, its glow extinguished. "We're not in it alone," whispered Sophie softly. "They're awaiting." The doors of the operating theater swung open, a gaping welcome back into the dark heart of the hospital. Evelyn's chest pumped hard, her breath misting in the cold. The silence was more frightening than the voices, an absence that was aware of them. The team clustered together, flashlights extinguished, equipment rendered inoperable. The hospital itself was alive, the walls vibrating with evil. "We can't remain here," Marcus said quietly but adamantly. He clutched his flashlight tightly before throwing it to the ground. "We have to get to the van. Now." Priya held the files in her hand tightly, her face white but resolute. "These files, they're evidence. We can't leave them." She shoved them into her bag and zipped it closed. Lucas agreed quietly, his eyes flitting to the darkness for the figures to come back. Sophie got to her feet slowly, the locket in her hand again, her face smudged with tears. Evelyn nodded, suppressing her fear. "The lobby again, then out the front. Together." She moved forward, her boots clattering in the corridor. The hospital appeared to shift before them, the walls closer in, the doors more. The air was thick with whispers just out of earshot, bits of pleading, laughter, screams. They moved to the staircase, its spiral plunging downward into the lobby's dim moonlight. But as they headed down, the stairs groaned beneath some unseen bulk. A shadowy form darted at the bottom of the stairs, too tall and too thin to be human. It hesitated, then slid out of view. Sophie whimpered and clutched Evelyn's arm. "They don't want us to leave," she said. "Keep moving," Evelyn commanded, her heart thudding. They moved down, their footsteps echoing unnaturally. The lobby was just as it had been left, gadgets scattered all about, patient records lying on the floor. But it seemed to vibrate with tension, like before a lightning storm. The front doors loomed before them, their glass panels shattered but still intact. Marcus was the first to arrive at the doors. He pushed against them. They did not move. "They're locked," he said tightly. He rattled on the handles and then booted the frame. The noise resounded, and out of the staircase at their back came an answering sound, a low, primal groan which swelled into a chorus of voices. Lucas whirled about, his face pale. "They're coming!" He pointed to the stairs, where darkness coalesced, silhouettes emerging out of the darkness. Figures in gowns and coats, moving stiffly, their eyes shining like coins in moonlight. The whispers filled the air. "Stay. No. Become." Priya dropped her bag on the floor and drew out a file. "The fire!" she exclaimed frantically. "The records indicated it originated in the boiler room. If we can get to it, possibly we can get out another way." She pointed at a side corridor labeled maintenance. Evelyn hesitated for a moment before following. "Go!" The voices grew louder, the blackness closer. A row of pipes ran along either side of the narrow corridor, hissing softly as if they were alive. The air thickened and became warmer, with the scent of ash displacing the must. A metal door with the sign "Boiler Room" cast in black scorch marks lay before them. Marcus pried it open and found himself in a cavernous room dominated by giant, rusty boilers. Scorched wreckage was scattered across the ground, and the walls had been blackened with scratches spelling out words: "Never leave. Never free." A sickly light emanated from in the center of the room where one boiler was left standing with its door open. She froze in shock, her eyes wide. "It's a trap," she barely breathed. "They lured us here." Before Evelyn had time to react, the door slammed shut behind them. The boiler's glow grew brighter, and from the darkness stepped out figures, hollow-faced patients and doctors with syringes in hand. The tallest of them all, the one in the broken mask, stepped forward, its voice hissing. "See us." Evelyn's mind was in disarray, but she snatched an old pipe from the ground. "Get back!" she yelled, flailing it. The apparition did not flinch, but the others hesitated, their heads cocked. Marcus stepped forward as well, wielding a wrench, and Priya and Lucas shielded Sophie. The masked entity drew back its syringe and the boiler's radiance pulsed, the voices thundering, "Become us." Evelyn swung the pipe and hit the entity's arm. The entity stumbled back, the syringe crashing to the ground, but the radiance did not decline. The other entities moved forward, their hands extended. Priya shouted and pointed at a grate on the wall. There! Small as it was large enough to squeeze through. Marcus forced it open, showing a tunnel filled with ash. In! He yelled, shoving Lucas through. Priya entered after her, then Sophie. Evelyn lingered, the figures moving in, touching her coat with their fingers. Marcus pushed her towards the grate. They crept, the tunnel starting to close in, the voices behind them. Breath caught in their lungs from the acrid air. Then suddenly, they were in the courtyard. The van was parked there, doors still open. They rushed inside, Evelyn jamming the key into the ignition. The engine sprang to life, and they accelerated through the gates as the hospital disappeared in the rearview. While driving, Sophie whispered, "They're still with us." Evelyn looked at the files in Priya's lap, their pages softly lighting up in the dark, and felt an icy presence which did not go away.